I'm interested in what you think about the federal support of chips and the incentives to build here in the United States. Ultimately, is that what you want to see from a profit margin perspective?
I think it highlights the importance of semiconductor industry as a whole, the strategic importance. But I think it's not just US, right? Globally, each country, they want to see more capacity built domestically for domestic consumption. So I think, broadly speaking, it's too early to tell whether or not it's necessarily good for profit because there's a supply, there's a demand. We have to see how the market dynamics actually play out. But it certainly highlights the importance of the industry as a whole. And I think that's what really technology is about, right? If you think about a lot of the push that's going on, the pace of innovation picking up, a lot of it is happening at the infrastructure level.
Lei, how does that commitment to onshore or expand internationally convert to top-line growth, and when does it convert to top-line growth? These are like really big capital projects, right, that take decades sometimes to get off the ground.
I think, market generally, and as investors, we are forward-looking. So it's not necessarily to say it has to translate into revenue or profit today, but it's really analyzing the market structure and to see how that's changing going forward for the next 5 to 10 years or 20 years. And there's definitely this underlying current in terms of, the competition for technology is picking up, and the upgrade for infrastructure, there's already the underlying AI demand that's going on. And on top of that, for this type of geopolitical tension-driven domestic consumption push, that, we're just seeing the underlying change in the market structure. And that's going to affect the long-term profitability for many of the participants. And that's the more important question. It's not about today, but it's really about 5, 10 years out.
Lei, your fellow technology investors keep talking to me about Broadcom. They basically say, look at the growth and the outlook and how the landscape has changed. When you and I first started talking, it was very much about NVIDIA. But now the conversation is like, why is Broadcom not one of the Mag 7 names? How do you see its role in this data center build out that's happening and the sort of varied offering it has across software and hardware?
I think we're still, when we think about the AI build-out, we're still actually in the early innings. If we think about even this year, and in the past few years, when you look, the CapEx certainly has gone up, and the infrastructure themselves, the changes are still happening because we're in the early innings. So I'm not here to comment on specific stock names, but I would certainly say the entire AI supply chain, what we're going to see, and we are quite optimistic in terms of the future because we think the demand is picking up, the adoption has reached an inflection point. So I think there will be various winners in the AI supply chain going forward, and we're still in the very early innings of it. And then what's also interesting is in this infrastructure build out, we think the pace of innovation is actually picking up. So the upgrade of infrastructure, the pace of it is actually also picking up. And the shape of the future is actually being formed as we speak. So we believe there'll be multiple winners in the overall supply chain.
Does all that innovation benefit previous winners? I know you're not going to talk individual names, but I think about some of the focus on innovations in chip making to make sure it's more energy efficient. Well, that's coming from startups, perhaps not just NVIDIA anymore.
I think what's interesting is when we thought about innovation, and then when we talk about the future leaders, some investors automatically say, oh, there must be the high growth, unprofitable players. But what is really interesting about this is that if you look the past 10, 15 years, we've had a lot of the consumer-facing names, and those are many of the Mag 7 names. But what is interesting is that this time, the innovation is really about the infrastructure. It's about the underlying technology infrastructure, as well as the physical infrastructure. So we're seeing a lot of innovation that's actually happening on the industrial front, on the energy transition front. So there are actually winners that kind of, you would be unexpected, and you think, oh, wow, you can find really profitable growth here. And that's what we are looking for.
Lei, one of the big news stories today is xAI, Elon Musk's frontier model maker, raising equity on top of the debt that it's put to the market. Do you track that as a sort of soft data set, the large language model builders and how regularly they raise capital, as an indicator of some of the chip names that you have exposure to and that sort of acceleration of spend that you've just outlined?
That's absolutely correct, because when we look at the future AI winners, a lot of the attention has been focused on the public market winners. But what's interesting is disruption is generally it starts from the private sector, and we actually have some of the very large leaders already, and they generate significant amount of revenue, and they're bringing disruption to the market as a whole. So yes, we track public market as well as private market, especially since these days you're going to see some very large valuation placed on some of these big players. And it's not just because of valuation, but simply these players are driving significant demand for AI as well.